Good morning. This is the very first episode, or I guess the inaugural Kenny Coffee and Cars. I'm Kenny Brown. I've got my coffee, Starbucks French Roast, and for the next half hour or so we're going to be talking about cars, and more specifically your questions about cars that that you filled out on the online survey that we did. And I want to thank you guys. You did an awesome job on the survey. The questions are amazing. I don't think there was a clunker in the bunch. And it really helps me as we're going forward for a workshop we're going to be doing. It's going to be called Transform Your Driving Experience. And that's going to be like a 5-day live workshop. And I'm going to kind of craft it based off of the questions that everybody asked. And along those lines, I've got a whole bunch of questions that came in I'm going to try to answer today. But to kind of, frame this thing, I've been building street cars, race cars, sports cars for about 50 years. And for the first half of my career, I actually made my living out of my toolbox. So that's what kind of makes me different from other people that, when they're selling parts in the aftermarket. So I actually worked on the cars and did it myself for, 20 some years. And through that, I wish I had something like this back when I started to help me get going, because I made a lot of mistakes, and you learn from your mistakes. So what I'm going to try to do with these questions and with the workshop is try to reduce the mistakes you make, based off of my experience, and to kind of give you like a better experience going forward. Now, the way the workshop is going to work, and we'll have more on this later, because we're going to set up a private group on Facebook. And we're having a hard time coming up with a name for this private group. The best thing we've come up with so far is the Kenny Brown Speed Therapy Society. That's a long name. If anybody's got a better idea for our private Facebook group on the workshop, please send it in. We're struggling. Hi, Chris. So what I want to do is I want to get some of these questions. And like I say, these are great questions. And I'm not going to get to all of them today because there's so many, but I'm going to try to get to as many as I can. And next week we'll kind of pick up where we leave off on questions. But what I've done is I've kind of grouped some of the questions together just based off of subject matter. But here's the first one we're going to start with. There's more entry-level drivers. By making more things more basic, focused, to that I think would be a good start. Well, people that know me, I'm really good into simple, basic, and trying to make things understandable. So that's just all part of what we're doing. I like to see as much about a car and what I can do to become a better driver. A better driver has better questions and more confident in purchases. Well, I'm gonna change the second part from a better driver to I'm guessing that makes a more experienced driver. And I'll kind of disagree with that, because I think that between the beginning driver and the experienced driver doesn't have more questions, they have different questions. They're going to have different questions based on where they are on their car they're driving. And the beginning, novice, even intermediate drivers are going to have different questions. So to me, there's no stupid questions. The only stupid questions are the questions that don't get asked. Because if you don't know the answer to something, ask a question. I'll try to answer it if I can. If I can't answer it, I'm not going to give you a bunch of BS and just say it's something I can't answer, or try to direct you to some place where you can get the information. And here's one that says, does weight transfer largely affect drag cars top end? Well, can't answer that. We don't do drag racing. I tried it years and years and years and years ago, and got bored with it pretty quickly, and then I just turned to road racing, and that's kind of where I've lived ever since. Let's see, really excited to just get the weaknesses of the S197 addressed, and another one pointing out the weak areas, parts that should be addressed first. Well, the S197 is no different than any other Mustang from the beginning to 2014. In essence, they're a pony car. And by that I mean you got a big, heavy, powerful engine in the front, and in the back you've got a live axle and no weight, which makes them, in all essence, they're basically a drive car. which means the strength of a drag car is going fast in a straight line. But with a Mustang, where we kind of run into issues is getting the cars to stop and turn. And we'll be getting into a lot of, how I make cars stop and turn, because there's nothing better than having a car on track that really, really feels good. Improving handling without increasing the harshness of the ride. Okay, here's something interesting. I use pretty high spring rates. In fact, I've been using higher spring rates than anybody else in the industry for a long time. And the reason for that, the more spring you put into a Mustang, the better it turns. And a lot of people think if you put a high spring rate in the car, it's going to equal a bad ride. And that's not true. The function of the spring is basically just to hold the car up. The ride quality actually comes from the shock absorbers, or more specifically the valving in the shock absorbers. And that's why I'm very particular on the shocks that we use. Over the years, I've developed. This is my shock data book, and as you can see, it's just loaded with shock dynos and shock data for years and years and years I've been collecting. And I've got to the point of like a specific range of shock dampening that I prefer. So all the shocks that we're doing today fall within that range. And the spring rates are something I pick individually for everybody that gets coilovers from us. I'll pick out the spring rates for their application, and I think coilovers, every car that I do has coilover shocks. Two specific reasons. Number one, you get to adjust your ride height, which is really handy. And secondly, I can control spring rate with it. We do different spring rates for different drivers, different applications. To just kind of give you a real quick, brief overview, and we'll get into more of this in the workshop, is the typical car right off the showroom floor runs about a 175 front spring rate. And on the S197s or any of the live axle cars, I always talk in terms of front spring rate, because that's how the car turns. I use the rear spring rate in the car to kind of balance the car. The more spring you put into a Mustang, the better it turns. To give you an example, the off the showroom floor car is running about 170, 175 front spring rate. Any off the shelf springs that you can get are going to be 220, 225 range. Very few go above that. Our touring package is 350 pound spring. Our street performance jumps to 400, and that is also good for novice track. That's a really good novice track spring rate. Our intermediate people is like 500, 550. Advanced track goes up to 650. And you're probably saying, my gosh, that's a lot of spring rate. Well, in my late son Paul's World Challenge Mustang on Pirelli slicks, we're running 850 and above pounds of spring rate. Now, the reason we start people low is the more spring you put into a car, the faster it gets. The downside of that is the more spring you put into the car, the smaller the envelope for error gets. So, when you're running a lot of spring rate, you got very little room for error. Like on Paul's, World Challenge car, there's very little room for error, but he was such a dynamic driver, he made it work. So that's why we always start people at a low spring rate, and as they improve through their driving, then we can, with the coilovers, we just pop out springs, pop new springs in, and just move them up. As their driving skills improve, we go to the next level, and then they learn to drive it even faster. Let's see, let's get down to my 01 has 150,000 miles with KB chassis and suspension mods. Looking for info on 2V46 refresh in moderate upgrade, and then also thoughts on trailers. A car like miles of that, just going through the motor, as far as a moderate upgrade, it all depends on what your budget is. Looking at the bigger picture, if you're rebuilding the motor, there's some nice stroker kits out there that'll take it from 4.6 to 5 liters. And then if you want to get more power and performance, all that power and performance comes from the heads, intake, and exhaust. So finding a set of CNC heads, maybe a mild camshaft, better intake and exhaust, and that's where your power is going to come from. An example on M69, which some of you have seen, it was my 2005 SEMA concept car that was kind of a wide body. It looked like a 69 Mustang on 2005. That had a 3-valve motor. And what we did is we put a set of CNC heads on, a nice camshaft, a better intake, and headers, and we picked up almost 100 horsepower. So all the horsepower is in the heads, intake, and cam. As far as thoughts on trailers, here's my thoughts on trailers. Number one, you want a trailer that has more room than the car. I like anywhere from 24 to 28, even 30-foot trailers, because you get the car in, and that gives you room for stuff. I mean, you always carry stuff. You can't go to a track without stuff. Additionally, you always want to get a trailer that has like the highest torsional rate, spring rate. You always want to go higher than what they normally do, because you always put more in the trailer than you think you're going to put in. And the other little trick I think is pretty important is get a trailer with a trap door. And by trap door, what I mean, also we call it escape hatch, is on the left side of the trailer. As you pull the car in, there's a door that'll swing up and open, so that you can like open the door on the car, step out, close the door, put the trap door back down. That gets you away from having to pull the car in and then kind of like scriggle your way out of the windshield and one foot out, another foot out. Makes it a lot easier. The other thing that's handy is you can also travel in the trailer with the driver's window up, which helps keep dust and like road dust out of there. So that's kind of my thoughts on trailers. Now here's kind of a group on Cobras. Items, particularly Mustang Terminator, and getting set up for track days. Advantages of IRS over live axle. Let's see, I have all new Cobra parts, 373 rear, etc. What I need is new shocks, coilover springs, and your rebuilt box frame. I'm guessing that's our re-engineered rear carrier for the IRS. And then another one, make my 99 Cobra lighter, overall, and faster. Well, let's start from the bottom and work up. Making a car lighter just depends on how much effort you want to put into it. I mean, you can take a little bit of weight out, you can take a lot of weight out. It all boils down to compromises. But things like forged wheels, you cut weight, carbon hoods, going to like a lighter seat, pulling stuff out. I mean, it just depends on how far you want to go. It's kind of easy to get the first 100, 200 pounds. After that, it takes more time and costs more. And as far as faster launch, drop the rear end ratio. And that's the quickest way to improve your launch, is get a lower rear end ratio. Let's see, it's advantages of IRS over live axle. Well, it's kind of like two distinctly different type of rear suspensions. Now, with a live axle, they're absolutely fabulous for drag racing. You get a good hard launch. On an IRS, really not so good for drag racing. Can you make it work? Yeah, you can make it work, but it's not the ideal situation. And back in '99, when the IRS Cobras came out, it kind of put the Mustang aftermarket into apoplexy. IRS, what do we do? Well, to me, it was no big deal, because her first half of my career, working on all these race cars and stuff, I worked on a lot of Formula cars and SCCA racing. Formula cars and IRS sports cars. Even the Triumphs back then had IRS. So to me, when the IRS Cobras came out, it was no big deal. It was something I've been dealing with for years. So what that's boiled down to is, right now, I think we are the only people in the aftermarket that actually focuses on the IRS Mustang. And again, it's because of my background, and we've made it right. I had the most wonderful track car I ever had, Kermie, which was a 2001. It actually started life as a V6 with a turbo that we built for SEMA, because Ford was wanting to show that the V6 had value, but it was also converted to IRS Cobra in the back, and of course our K member in the front. And after SEMA, we actually upgraded it to a prototype 4.6 FR500 engine package that we were working with Ford Racing at the time. And that car was amazing, and I could drive it, put anywhere on the track. It just drove like a dream. Back then, I used to give rides, for charity, where people pay like $20, and we go for like 3 laps. And that car was so easy to drive. I could do that all day and not get tired. So I love the IRS Cobras, and we are still doing IRS Cobras. In fact, we're still doing conversions on '99 to '04 Cobras. So getting back to the questions, the IRS has an advantage of going, the wheels work independently in the back, which means for their handle bumps much, much better than the live axle. And they work so much differently. I mean, you can actually get camber out of an IRS rear end, where you can't get camber out of an axle unless you kind of camber it, and that's not what you really want to do at our level of stuff. Now, just in case we have some people that just joined, I'm Kenny Brown. We're doing Kenny Coffee and Cars. I'm answering the questions from our survey that we put out, which is all helping me to shape the program we're going to do, called Transforming Your Driving Experience. And we're going to do that through a private Facebook group, and we'll have more information on that coming up. And if you want to get into that, just kind of say yes, and our people will get back to you. Let's see, Alex requested talk about pre-season maintenance, specifically torque for various joints. Okay, as far as torque, there is a lot of information online about the torque values for everything in the Mustang. I've got some in my folder, which, oops, sorry, this is our first time. I've got some in my folder. I guess I can kind of maybe send that to one of our guys, and they can post that up for you. But the thing about let me adjust this. Everything got bumped. You really want to pay attention to torque values. Under torquing, you have a chance of nuts getting loose, and that's not a good thing. Over torquing and you stand a chance of overstressing the bolts. And we'll get into hardware again in our workshop, but we always use grade 8 bolts on the American side, and then grade 10.9 or 8.8 on the metric side. So we'll kind of get something put up. Thoughts on a new GT versus 2000 era Cobra? Well, two completely different cars. The new S550 has a completely different IRS, completely different front suspension. It's really, really nice. Plus, they've got all those nanny features in there to help you from out front getting in trouble. You're welcome. Somebody said thank you for doing this. Okay, where did I leave off? Oh, that's live axle versus IRS. So live axle is a drag racing rear end. Live axle is a drag racing rear end. IRS is more for road racing. And what we do with my suspension systems is we try to get all the bad things out of the rear suspension and really make them handle which we're going to get into. And the other question is, what I need is coilover shocks and springs. Well, I just said everything we do is coilovers, and when you get a coilover shock from us, it's going to have. I'm going to choose the spring rate specifically for your application. I'm going to do a pre-adjust on the shocks, and actually you get a little sheet like this. It's kind of like a setup sheet that tells you what the spring rates are, and there's kind of a little basic 101 on adjusting shocks on the bottom. But for the S197s, our preferred shock, especially for track, is the JRZs, and that's because I got really used to the JRZs from Paul when he was running World Challenge. Really great shock, and we've had them. The RS series is more of a street performance, track day performance, club shock. They take their technology from the race shocks and they detune them, rather than other shock companies that take a street shock and tune it up. This is tuned down. And then on the SN95s, we actually have strange build shocks custom for me to my specifications. Now, I said over the years, my book on shock dynos. Right here, there's a dyno sheets for Mustang live axle double adjustable. So like I say, it's all about shocks and spring rates have a lot to do with how a car handles. questions keep popping up here. Let's see, Edward. Okay, is it important for my control arms to be level on a 99 Cobra? I'm not sure if that's front or rear control arms, but level isn't the issue. It's the relationship between the upper and lower control arms. That's where the geometry comes into play. I'm trying to think. I think maybe they're level. But it's been a long time since I just poked my head under a car and I wasn't even looking at that. So it's more about the relationship between upper and lower control arms. Okay, let's see. Here's what upgrades on a 4.6 double overhead cam to make more power, reliable street engine. Well, I kind of went over that with the same thing. All the power comes from the heads, intake, better cams and exhaust. I mean, there's a lot of really good CNC'd heads out there. If you're going to do it on a 4.6 double overhead cam, use the Terminator, the 03 and 04 heads. They're about the best. And start with that. Let's see. Okay, this is a good one. Best power plant options for track cars. Naturally aspirated, supercharger, turbo. And then how to install a supercharger. Well, we won't go over that because all the manufacturers have information on that. And then procedure requirements. What supercharger would be better? Excuse me. And let me back up to the first one. Best power options for track cars. Now my preference, just hands down, is naturally aspirated. You can get a lot of power from superchargers and turbos, but when you start adding that stuff, you're doing two things. You're adding weight and you're adding complexity. And the more complexity you have, the more things there are to break. Rather than going the supercharger, I mean, just having a car that really handles well, you don't need super massive power. My 2012 Ruby, my track car, the only thing we did to the motor was a tune, cold air kit, and headers and exhaust. And the rest was all chassis and suspension. And that had enough power that, like Road America, which we went to a lot, has big, long straightaways. And on the middle straightaway, heading down to turn 5, time and time again, I would come out of turn 3, and carrying a load of steam, and I'd fly past GT500s. So it's not about big power. We've got another video of me at Road America, coming through turn 14, which is the last turn before the straightaway, front straightaway. And I actually had to back out of the gas to keep from running into a Viper. And when the Viper kind of gave me the point by, I was carrying so much speed off the corner that he never caught me down the straightaway. So you really don't need massive power. You just need a car that really works. Let's see what else we got here. Okay, what kind of superchargers and turbos? Well, a turbo is, if you're going to do something like that, a turbo is what race cars have, because a turbo basically takes the wasted exhaust gas, puts it through a compressor to compress the air going to the engine. They're good for race cars. Again, complexity, weight, a lot of things that can break. Superchargers, and there's two basic types of superchargers. There's positive displacement and centrifugal. Positive displacement are like the Roush, the Whipple, the Eaton. They have like the twin screws, and they make boost in power like straight away. So you hit the throttle and make power. The other, that's what I prefer for Mustangs, is centrifugal, like Vortec or what's the other one? Anyway, because what they do, they're using engine power to drive the compressor. So it's like a mechanically driven turbo, so to speak. But the thing about the positive displacement in a Mustang have traction problems to start with. And with positive displacement, you hit the gas, you got power and torque instantly, which a lot more times than not will overwhelm the rear tires. Well, with the ProCharger, I remember ProCharger or Vortec, they build power up through the RPM range. So the faster you go, which means you're building power down the straightaway when you've got good traction. More power on the straightaway than you have off the corner, so you get off the corner and you just build power right down the straightaway. Positive displacement superchargers, though, I love on trucks and tow vehicles, because that gives you that torque right away. So that's kind of like my view on that. Here's another one. Also requirements. Anytime you put a supercharger or a turbo into a car, you're massively increasing the horsepower. And you know, the cars are engineered around what, 300-400 horsepower, whatever they come from the factory. When you add another 100 horsepower, the cars really weren't engineered for that from the factory, so you really need to start looking at some upgrades. Chassis, suspension, brakes, wheels, and tires. That's a performance platform. I mean, you really need to up things because, you know, you start going fast and things happen fast, and you need to be able to have control. The other thing is, as far as requirements, you also need to significantly increase your cooling capacity because you're making a lot more horsepower, a lot more heat. So, I mean, bigger radiators, sometimes oil coolers, you got to have more cooling. And then speed density versus mass air. If you're upgrading to a supercharger, if you're doing an older car, has speed density, absolutely convert to mass air, because what you're doing, you're actually metering the air that's coming into the car. And an E85 for supercharged cars, well, there's a lot of people making a lot of power with E85 because alcohol burns a lot cleaner, a lot cooler, so you can run more boost. The only thing is you actually use a lot more fuel. I don't know what the ratio is, but you know, you can use a ton more fuel, but making more horsepower. So yes, E85 is great for supercharged cars. What do we have? Thoughts on Delrin bushings? Okay, actually, that's another question down here. We're going to get into that in a little bit. Moving down, what track day adjustments should we make for the street car? Track day setup, how to best out of the car for short sessions, common issues with tracking Mustangs. How should a car feel and drive for dual-purpose street track day setup? Recommended front settings, importance of corner weightings, worth coilover shocks for streetcar track cars. Well, we did coilover shocks. Absolutely, that's an important thing. You know, if you have a dual-purpose streetcar track car, you just kind of work your spring rates and shock valving around dual-purpose. You can also get dual-purpose brake pads, and we'll get into brake pads here a little bit later. And as far as car setup, you know, the thing for our people who have our stuff, I mean, the car setup from the street to the track is pretty easy because we mostly use adjustable shocks. So you turn the cars down for the track and for the street, and then you go to the track, you kick them up a little bit, and you also put your tire pressure up. We'll talk about that later. And then for front end alignment, a really good trick that we do, I tell people, is you take your car to your alignment shop, because people think they align the car, go to the track, have to align it from the track, come back, have to realign it. Well, here's the easy way to do it. You go to your alignment shop, you get a good street setup on there, and to me that is about 0.75 to 1.5 negative camber. And as far as caster, put every bit of caster you can into the car, because Mustangs love caster. In fact, both of my K members, SN95 and S197, we actually engineer them to add extra caster. And as far as toe, and this is really important, you want 1/16 toe out. Now, most people put toe in, but toe out 16th, that's total left and right. That's like minus 0.25, minus 3.3. That little bit of toe out actually helps turn in to a corner, and it kind of gets you into a corner quicker. The importance of corner weighting. Well, you know, for these cars, and if you're not in a full race application, you can corner weight if you want, but it really isn't going to make a lot of difference. And because these cars have ABS, you know, one of the big things of doing corner weights is trying to get the front balanced, because if you have one side that's really light, when you hit on the brakes really hard, you're going to lock up that tire. Well, with ABS, that's not an issue. And you know, at track day level, it's not going to make a big difference. When I first started in the engineering cars for Speedworks in the Mustang Challenge, and I think 09 or 010, I mean, their background was Indy Lights and Indy cars, so they had their setup pads, and every time the cars came off track, they put them on the setup pads. It's like, you know, you don't need to do that. We were talking about street cars that, you know, things move around a lot. And you know, after a couple weekends, they finally convinced them that it put a lot of effort for no result. So I mean, you can do it if you want. You know, there's not going to be a big gain. If you don't have a ABS car, It might be, it'll be okay, but the thing you want to do is balance those front corner weights because you don't want a wheel to lock up. And one of my favorite subject, Watts linkage improved cornering noticeably, and dialing in the different types of suspensions, coilovers, torque arm, panner bars. Okay, we'll start with Watts link. Watts link is by far and away the best way to locate a live axle. The downside to Watts links is where the center pivot point is on the bell crank. That's actually your roll center. And but the roll center of the Mustang is up in like in the middle of the differential. On the S197s, wherever the panner bar crosses the center line of the car, that's your roll center. And it's up pretty high. In fact, you can feel it. You go around a corner and you kind of feel that inside tire get light as the rear lifts up. Well, it's getting light in back. It's actually putting weight on the opposite front tire going around a corner, which can actually make the car push. So, with a Watts link, you can't get that roll center down. Back in the Trans Am days, what we used to do is actually mount a Watts link horizontally underneath the differential, which was easy to do because you've got frame rails that you can tie into. With a Mustang, that's pretty impractical. So in our rear grip kit for S197s, we have a relocation kit. We just take the panner bar, move it all the way down to the bottom of the differential. So it's the same roll center as what we used to run, and you can feel the difference. I mean, the car doesn't want to roll up as fast. And we'll get more into suspension geometry in the work group. And then torque arms. I don't use them, don't like them. I mean, they were pretty cool when they first came out. I think maybe the 1929 Bugatti or something like that. And GM used them on the Camaros, and that was primarily because of packaging. They didn't have enough room to do a proper suspension, so they used a torque arm. A torque arm is really good for forward bite. I mean, you can get a lot of forward bite off of a torque arm. There are two issues I have with number one is it adds a whole bunch of mass. There's a great big chunk of steel, added to the axle, which is unsprung weight. And the more unsprung weight you have, the more sluggish your suspension is going to be. The less unsprung weight you have, the more reactive your suspension is going to be. And the other thing is braking. You really can't brake super hard with a torque arm unless you can decouple it from the chassis. I mean, with my suspension in my S197, we can outbrake torque arms just 7 ways to Sunday because we have control over the instant center and the anti-squat. And I discovered this a long time ago. We built a couple of Cobras, actually 95 Cobras for a couple of customers of ours who loved track days. In fact, they had multiple cars. They'd run a track and they'd bring a whole bunch of cars. And they brought a bunch of cars because they figured if one break, they'd jump in another one to drive it. Well, I was driving one of their, either Camaro or Firebird, I can't remember which, and it was at Putnam. There's a really tight turn. It's not quite a hairpin, but it's pretty close to it. And I always just going to charge up and just stand on the brakes, get the car slowed down, get to rotating through the corner. Well, my first time I did that with the Camaro, and it's like all of a sudden the back of the car started hopping all over the place. And as I went around the corner, I kept hearing this clunk, clunk, clunk. Well, as I went back into the pits, and what happened is the torque arm actually pulled out of its forward mooring. So I mean, they're okay for forward bite. They're okay for the Camaros, but there's a better way to do it, and I think it's with a 3-link or a 4-link. How are we doing on time?
We're almost finished.
We're running out of time, but I'm going to try to squeeze in more questions. Kingpin angle problem on Fox SN95s.
Use it with strut setup or SLA.
Okay. Kingpin. Okay, the kingpin angles on the strut cars are not a real consideration. There's not a whole lot you can do about it. As far as let's see, stick with strut or go to SLA. I've got two thoughts on that. First of all, SLA is a much better suspension because you can do better things with geometry. But it costs a lot of money and it takes some setup. With the strut suspension, it's simpler. And with what I've done to the geometry, like in S197s, SN95s, Paul and my late son did some initial testing on our GT4 suspension system. he told me that the front worked absolutely as good as any of the double wishbone cars he's driven. So I mean that's the long and short of it. So the strut is more economical, and we can make them work every bit as good or as most double wishbones. I will say next year we should be coming out with a double wishbone for the S197s, but there'll be more on that later in the year. Okay, let me squeeze in just a couple more questions. Oh, this is important. This is a really important group. I eventually will buy a kit that guides the air from the front to air intakes to the front brakes. I don't know if it would help much, but since the intakes are there, it'll be no-brainer, make it work. The next one is like, I continually have a lot of trouble with brakes, eating rotors, overheating, vibration, and noise. And the third is interested in getting the most out of rotor life and pad life. One word: temperature, heat. You have to reduce the heat. The front brakes on a track get really hot. And the reason for that is, I mean, you're hauling down a straightaway. You got 3,700 pounds of mass. That's kinetic energy just storming to the next turn. And the only way to slow that kinetic energy down is through the brakes. And the brakes take the kinetic energy and turn it into heat energy. So that's how you slow down. And getting air to the front brakes, absolutely totally important. Now you can get by with it at novice, first couple track events, but as soon as you start getting serious and drive fast, you really need to have brake ducts. On my track car, with brake ducts, I'm seeing rotor temperatures of 1,100–1,200 degrees. Factory brake pads are only good to like maybe 400 or 500 degrees. So we'll get it in a brake pad compounding too, but there's always I say there's a street compounds with the street and track compounds with track, and never the twain should meet. Although we do have some crossover pads if you're not driving really super hard, that you drive on both the street and the track. But you need to get air to them. As far as the trouble with the brakes eating rotors, it's heat. I mean, if you are running brake ducts and you're still getting overheating and vibration, we need to look at what's going on, because you really shouldn't be. And as far as getting the most out of pad life, keep the brakes cool. Your pads and rotors are going to last a lot longer. We sort of run out of time for today. I've got a bunch more questions. I think we'll pick this up next Saturday. And, let me know what you guys think of all this. I mean, there's been so many things coming in, I can't even hardly read them. But, to kind of go back over what we're doing, this is, the Kenny Coffee and Cars. Gosh, I didn't even drink any coffee. I was so busy answering questions. And this is all part of we asked on our survey to give me a better understanding of what people would like to learn in our 5-day workshop. It's going to be called Transform Your Driving Experience. And that's going to be done through a private or closed Facebook group. And there'll be more information coming up in the next few days or so. So all you have to do, I think today, just say, yeah, I'm in, or whatever, and stay in touch, and we'll get you into that closed group. And I'm going to go back and tell you what great questions these are. That kind of blew me away, both the number and then the quality. And as you can see, these are all important questions. And going back to the very beginning, novices are going to have different questions from the more advanced people, and the only stupid questions are the question you don't ask. So please, if you don't know something, ask. We'll try to get to it if we can. I'm just amazed at how. Again, thanks again. We really appreciate this.
Every Saturday.
And we're going to try to do this every Saturday that I'm available. Because I can't say every Saturday, because I've got a lot of track days and other things. But when I'm available on Saturdays, 11 o'clock in the morning, we're going to try to keep doing this, so I can try to give you people as much information as I can to kind of make your driving experience, to transform your driving experience. Let's put it that way. Okay, we'll see you next Saturday. Thanks.